Welcome to the Arizona Civics Podcast, where we focus on strengthening civic education in Arizona. Our mission is to support educators, engage with experts, and connect with community leaders to enhance civics for students across the state. We're excited to have you tune into the podcast as we elevate civics for educators and students in the Grand Canyon State. Along the way, we'll be joined by some longtime colleagues and friends, along with some new friends who share our passion for civics and Arizona. I'm your host, Liz Evans, Program Director for Civic Education and Outreach at Arizona State University's Center for American Civics. Let's work together to make a difference and inspire the next generation of citizens. I am very excited to chat with our guest today, mostly because I think there are so many things that are available to Arizona teachers. Arizona teachers don't really know about. I met Monica through the Arizona Council for History Education. I am now on the board of directors, but one of my first experiences was the conference last year. I got to present and I got to be a part of it. And it was as somebody who goes to a lot of conferences, it was so well run. And I left, even though I'm not in the classroom, I left with so many ideas and connections. And I felt good after that experience. So good, in fact, that I wanted to be a part of the board of directors. So I wanted to introduce Monica. Monica is the current president. So actually, Monica, I will let you introduce yourself and let our listeners know kind of anything you want to tell us about you.
Hi, my name's Dr. Monica Ketchum-Cardenas, and I'm a professor of history and sociology at Arizona Western College down in Yuma. So the southwest corner. We call it the West Coast of Arizona. And I've been participating in the AIC conferences for probably about 10 or 11 years. And just like you, it was going to an AIC stands for Arizona Council for History Education. And it was through going to a conference that I started to become more and more involved. And I was approached because I was the only person coming from Yuma, and I was presenting on a regular basis. And they said, "Hey, do you want to join our board?" And I said, absolutely. I mean, I was really excited to come on board, because I am passionate about supporting teachers, even though I've never taught in the history in the K-12 classroom. I really believe that that's a place where we need to focus our support. Not only in Arizona, but nationwide. And I loved that, one of the guiding principles, if you will, for AIC and the National Council for History Education, NCHE, it really is to provide resources and provide support for classroom teachers. And that's something that, like you said, you just don't get that in a lot of conferences. A lot of times it's more like, this is what I'm writing a book on or an article on, and people are just sharing what they've done research on and getting feedback. But we're really student and teacher focused in terms of our organization.
And I love that. And one of the things that I really liked is, going to a meeting, we were talking about the national conference. This year it was in St. Louis, Missouri, and AIC has scholarships and they can send a couple of teachers to that. You got to go to the conference. So tell us a little bit about the NCHE conference and what kind of opportunities teachers who are members have.
Well, the National Council for History Education has an annual conference, and they hold it in a different historical city every single year. And of course, we know this year the theme was all history is local. And so when I say historical city, every city has a history, every town has a history. And this year was really interesting because I thought I don't know what I was thinking about St. Louis, but I was really gobsmacked really by all of the history that is in St. Louis that I didn't even connect to St. Louis. In addition to the conference, you have excursions to historical places and opportunities to network. And being in Arizona, a lot of times we feel, we're all the way out in the West, in the Wild West, and that we don't always have the same connections and opportunities that people on the East Coast, particularly if you're like in the New England and New York and Virginia area, there's all kinds of opportunities for teachers there. And so one of the things that we think is really important for AIC is to provide opportunities for our teachers to also attend the conference. And so each year, as long as I've remembered, we send 4 people to the conference. And so this can be a combination of board members. It can be regular members. We always try to have at least two of our members go, sometimes more. And we provide the conference registration and then travel funding, because we know that it's not cheap to fly out of different parts of Arizona, and then the hotel and things like that. So I think this is something that we're really committed to, so that in universities, sometimes there's more funding for people to travel, although we know that there's been, a lot of issues trying to get travel funding more recently, especially since COVID, things have kind of been dialed back. But that doesn't exist in the K-12 system in Arizona. It's really difficult. You have to go and get individual grants and things like that. And so we like to offer that as an opportunity for our teachers. And our conference, our local conference, is also just a benefit of membership. And so we make sure that our teachers in Arizona, if you join the Arizona Council for History Education, it's like $25 a year, and you're also a member of the National Council for History Education. And so you have all of those benefits, plus we have a conference every year that you can attend. And then, we have other grants. We have classroom grants. So you can apply for a classroom grant up to $500, because we know we need more resources in the classroom. And so if there's some kind of curriculum that you want to purchase for your classroom, if there's materials that you need for a lesson, then those are things that you can apply for these grants. And they're not it's not a complicated application process. And we just we love to reach out and help teachers in the classroom, so that we can support the teaching of history and make sure that young people throughout Arizona have access to quality history education.
Yeah, I mean, and I think one of my favorite things about being on the board is when we were having the discussion about sending people, and it was very classroom teacher focused. Like, we want to make sure that at least somebody going is a classroom teacher and gets that support. And I mean, I love going to our meetings because it does feel like that. We are both in higher ed. I was in K-12 for a while. And I think sometimes, especially teachers of history and civics, feel like they're left to their own devices. It's very lonely. And now that my eyes have been open to all of these things, it's like,
there are so many people out there that want to help. And you mentioned the conference. So the local conference that ACHE is putting on is in September. Can you talk a little bit about that and why a teacher should go?
Sure. Just going back to NCHE, I mean, I know you were just blown away by the number of elementary school teachers and early career teachers who were there. I mean, there was just this really, great vibe throughout the conference because these are people that are just thirsty for knowledge, and they also need a lot of support. And so I was just really excited to see so many, like I said, early career and K-8 teachers in there, because they seem to have the least amount of support in the classroom, because when you are teaching elementary school, you're also juggling everything else in addition to history and civics, right? And then with our Arizona local conference, we also encourage pre-service teachers to attend. And so that gets people to be able to network even before they're in the classroom and learn about all of the resources that we have available for students. We also have exhibitors there that are from the various organizations in Arizona that are there to provide resources. And yeah, I mean, it's something that we're really committed to, because we really do believe that if we don't do something like this, right? If we don't have a history focused, a classroom focused conference in Arizona, that our classroom teachers are just not going to have the support that they deserve. And even if they may not take away everything from the conference. I mean, they may go and say, well, I teach world history, so maybe the keynote, it's not something that I can use, but we find world-class keynote speakers. So even if it's not a topic that somebody is, really going to be using, they're just inspired. They go away inspired. And we do like to have what one of our former board members, one of the founders of AIC, used to say, we try and have some shovel-ready lessons, right? So that the attendees can come in and take away lesson plans, take away ideas that they can just turn around and implement in their classrooms. And that's, I mean, it is our signature event. We do, we provide other support throughout the year, but I think if somebody is a pre-service teacher, if somebody is a classroom teacher, if somebody is early career, or just kind of facing burnout, which I think a lot of us recently, it's a way to come together and really be inspired. And we hold it in September. We used to have it in August, which was a little bit hotter, but we have it now, so that by the time people settle into their classes, they're like, okay, it's another year. And then you just kind of have this injection of excitement and new ideas. And I feel that it can really, inspire people to keep, pushing forward throughout the rest of the semester, the rest of the term, because they get that just, I guess the only way I can describe it is like an injection of history, right?
Yes.
And also just the networking, right? They're like, okay, I know somebody at another school. So if you're in a smaller school where you might be the only person who teaches history or civics, history and civics, right? You might be feeling like you're just in this little silo and nobody, understands, and there's no one to bounce ideas off. Well, now you're in a room with people who are from throughout, typically the greater Phoenix area, although we have people coming, sometimes from Flagstaff and Tucson. But you really feel like now I have a community of teachers, and lifelong learners, right? Who can bounce ideas off of each other, who can sometimes commiserate with each other, but might partner up and develop, curriculum together and things like that. So I think that's one of the things that makes our conference, special and important for history educators to attend each year.
I mean, last year, and I can't believe this because I've been a history and civics teacher for over 2 decades. And last year was my first year attending, and I loved the keynote. I have his book. And I loved that every time I walked into a room or a session, it felt very welcoming, right? I think that sometimes, especially if you are somebody who's going by yourself, you're like, I don't like, it's hard. This conference was just very like, hey, come sit over here and look at what's going on. And I will say I'm very excited for our keynote speaker this year. It is Dr. Stephen Knott. He has written a lot of books, most recently a book on JFK, but our theme this year is conflict and cooperation. And what we're really looking at is, in times of struggle, what has the United States done, world, Arizona, looking at, because it feels right now sometimes hard to teach history and civics, but this isn't the first time it's happened, right? And so we're really trying to spotlight, there have been lots of times in our nation's history and our state's history where there has been a lot of conflict. What had to go into cooperating to kind of move forward? So I am stoked for this conference. And I feel like it's not an expensive conference. Members are free, correct?
Yes, we don't charge for the conference. We it's a benefit of membership. So just join the Arizona Council for History Education and you are in. So,
and I will make sure to put that link in our show notes so that anybody that wants to has the ability. So one of the things that you and I have talked about before is how teachers can be leaders in their communities. I think sometimes teachers think, well, I can only be a leader if I'm a department chair, or I can only be a leader, X, Y, and Z. And you actually have experience being a leader in your community. Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Sure. I grew up in a very politically active family, and I come from a mixed marriage. My mother was Democrat and my father was Republican, and so we never subscribed to the idea that you don't talk about politics. And but I learned from a very early age that we have to have political discourse, and that everyone, it goes back to the old adage that, politics are personal, right? And everybody has the opportunity to effect change in their community, to engage in their community in different ways. And so, I was always pretty shy growing up, but I was around all of these discussions. And then even, as a teacher, I'm always telling my students, you have to vote, right? You have to be engaged. If that's the minimum is voting. And sometimes students will say, well, it's just, my vote doesn't really count. But I've seen numbers of times when on a city council or, a supervisor, a county supervisor seat, it's been a handful of votes between the person who wins the election and the one who doesn't, right? And so when I turned 18, there's a couple of friends of mine. The most exciting thing about turning 18 was registering to vote, right? And so we were always kind of, hooked into politics. And for a long time, I thought that politics was really just those elected officials. And that wasn't really where I wanted to necessarily go. But I became involved in various community, organizations, and that's where my political impact has come from. So I had a business in Calexico, California, and so I joined the Chamber of Commerce, and I was elected to the board of directors. And then I was elected to the executive board. I served as president for a couple of years, and I realized that being the president or the treasurer or whatever on a city chamber of commerce board is political, right? You're advocating. I had to go to city council meetings and things like that. And then I've also been involved in a lot of organizations that are related to raising awareness about or raising funds for domestic violence shelters, women's shelters, and I am a member of Seroptimus International, and through that I've gone to. I was just a couple weeks ago. I was at the Commission on the Status of Women. I was a delegate to the UN, and so my path towards being involved in politics has been more in civil society through nonprofit organizations and community organizing, and I do feel like people who might not want to, be the next president or the next senator, whatever, in Arizona, they might say, I'm not really political, right? But find something that you're passionate about, and it makes being politically active and engaging in the civic space something that eventually will become natural, right? So I've helped to organize coalitions that were like a human trafficking coalition that was interdisciplinary, where you're bringing together law enforcement, district attorneys. And when I'm talking about law enforcement, we're talking like police, sheriffs, FBI, Homeland Security, bringing all of these different people together in a room and being able to put aside your differences and focus on the mission and the problem, at the same time getting different people's perspectives. And I think that's something that has, experiences like that, I think, have served me well in terms of just my personal life and in the world that we're living in now, because we are seeing that politics is very polarized right now. And it's not the first time, and it won't be the last time that we've had, this polarization in the civic space and in the political space. But I think working with, in community organizing and working in community organizations really helps you to step back and realize that although what many people see in the news is the two extremes and people yelling at each other and just the hate that comes out of it, that when we all sit in a room together, that we are often able to put aside our differences and work towards a common solution, right? And so I, that's kind of my I don't know, my perspective, I guess, on being active in the community. I
appreciate that, because I think it, like, giving that local look, and you're right, like people think sometimes politics means I have to run for office and I have to do this, and everything you're talking about, it's that's what you wanted to do, right? And this is how you want to be involved, and it does, I think, bring more hope when you're watching the national news and you're seeing all this division, but you're like, well, my personal experience, and I love that you grew up in a politically divided household. One of the things I wish there were more of is civil discourse and not shying away. But because you know the conversation you're going to have is going to be a conversation, you're going to learn from it. And I think part of the reason that people shy away from political conversations now is because that's what they see is the yelling back and forth and this divisiveness. But when you really come down to a local level, like you said, when we're all sitting at a table tackling a problem, we're not looking at, well, you're a Republican or you're a Democrat. We're looking at, this is the problem. How can we solve this for our community?
Yeah, great point. I think that that when we, if you're a teacher, a lot of times you, like you said, you think the only way I can be political is if I run for, I'm at the high school, so maybe I run for the elementary school board, which is not really what I want to do. And that's kind of the mindset that people have, is that it has to be an elected office. But there's so many different ways that we can be involved. I often tell my students that, when they, kind of hem and haw about voting, because I'm like, how many of you guys are going to vote? And they'll be like, it's not going to make a difference. But I say, well, I have a problem with the Electoral College because it's not the 1700s, right? I say, well, think about, you got to vote down the ballot, because in fact, I say you need to vote up the ballot, start at the local level,
Yes.
because the president of the United States is not going to fix the pothole in front of your house. Right?
Mhm.
And I mean, these are the things that you call your city council, or you call the county supervisors about, things that are, present in your local community. So look at who those people are who are running for school board, who are running for county supervisor, who are running for judge, and start there and then work up. And then I also, I do not like canvassing. I've canvassed for a couple of politicians, and it always happened on a Saturday or Sunday morning, and people are not happy to see you knocking on their door at 8 o'clock in the morning. And so I just do not like doing that, and it's just not my bag. And I've told people in the past, like, okay, I'll do anything for you except canvas, because I just don't like it. But for some people, they love it. You're getting out there in the morning, you're spreading the word. Yeah, so I say there's so many ways that you can get involved. And even if you don't want to get involved that way, if you have, if you're keeping up with, what's going on in politics, if there's a ballot initiative that you're not very, happy about, or if there's a piece of legislation that you don't support, write to your congressman or person, write to your senator, write to your state senator, write to the governor. And I know a lot of it can be really you have contact, and you might have a form letter from different organizations. You can call them, and they may not agree with you, but if they get enough people calling, then that is going to have an impact. And I mean, for me, I get we received your letter, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to do anything with it, but if I can be a little thorn in my representative's side, who does not share my political beliefs, then more power to me, right? And I think that when you have representatives and senators, they're there to represent the people. When you have a county supervisor, they're there to represent their constituents, and they don't always get an accurate pulse of what their constituents really want, because you can hold a town hall meeting, but not everybody is going to have access to go to that town hall meeting. It might be at a bad time. There might be transportation issues, especially when we look at our huge, districts that we have in Arizona.
Yes.
And so sending that letter and voicing your opinion, it doesn't hurt, right? And it's one way that each of us can get elected if you do a letter writing campaign or something like that. So I always do encourage my students to do that. And I don't know, just getting people active and reading up on the issues, because if we don't, right, if we don't do anything, then nothing's going to change. And if we do something, maybe nothing's going to change, but we can say we tried, right?
I would rather do something and have, than not do something, right? Because if there's a bunch of people who are like, well, my vote doesn't count, well, there is a political cartoon that says like my vote doesn't count, but it shows like a bunch of people. Like the things we do count, they may not count in this moment, but they do eventually count, whether you're talking to your neighbors or you're doing a letter writing campaign or you're focusing on these state and local elections. Those are national elections are important as well, but you're right, the people who are going to fix, so our neighborhood has a cow problem because cows just are like, there are times I look over and I can see a bunch of them coming down the street. The national government's not going to fix that for me. It's going to be my town council. So how then would you encourage, the hope is that they learn civic knowledge in K-12. And this is something I know teachers are trying to do. Teachers can only do so much because there's only so many hours in the day. There's so much that is required of teachers. What can teachers do, whether it's at K-12 or whether they're teaching at the college level, to get students to be involved, besides telling kids like, go register to vote and go do this canvas or whatever else?
Well, I think having projects or assignments that are related to political issues or social issues. I have an assignment. This isn't in a history class, but it's in one of my other classes where I have students design either an awareness campaign or or some kind of fundraiser for a cause that they're interested in, and talk about what they're going to be doing about it. So it could be hunger in Yuma County. And so what are they going to do to support the local food bank? And so they'll create a campaign and learn about like how they can leverage their networks in order to try and bring about positive change. So, things have changed over time. It used to be that you had to take out an ad in the newspaper or you had to print up a bunch of flyers and mail them out. But now we have social media, right? So they could design a social media campaign, right? And just getting them thinking about the myriad ways that they can become engaged for positive social change. And some of them have done things that were political. I had one that had a plan to reduce the length of the lines going from through the San Luis port of entry into Mexico, because there's so many commuters that in the afternoons and you'd have, the lines just backed up and people are idling and there's, pollution from cars and things like that. So I had a student who said, okay, first of all, I have this plan. I'm going to take it to the city council about this, that, and the other. And it really makes them think about like just a small issue in their community that they might be able to, light a fire under those public officials to actually take action. So I think designing some, and it doesn't have to be a big project, but designing assignments that have students think about the impact that that their civic involvement could have. Even if you're teaching, early U.S. history, and you're like, oh, well, that isn't necessarily relevant to today. Well, you could look at issues that were happening in the 1800s, or even in, just say looking at the 1800s or something, and then ask that follow-up question: what might you do today, or what's an issue that's similar to this that we need to change today, and have students kind of think critically about what they might do. Go back to what they might do back then, or what they might do if in the 1820s we had social media, right? Things like that. How would common sense, have been, distributed today, right? It would have been distributed on TikTok, right? It would have been just like sound bites rather than publishing all of common sense, right? And thinking about one of the things that, going back to common sense, I'll have students, look at it and say, not everything that Thomas Paine is going to resonate with everyone. But if you were living at this time and thinking about like your family, and maybe maybe your family's, merchants, or they're farmers, or whatever, which of these points would have kind of pushed you towards becoming a revolutionary, right? Because when people are reading it, they're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. It's not relevant to me, right? But there's going to be one or two things that people are going to say, oh, that's right. And so just kind of sometimes taking some of those older documents, or the Declaration of Independence, and then if you're looking at like more recent U.S. history, thinking about the Civil Rights Movement, and the same thing, like designing a civil rights campaign in today's society. It gets students thinking about how civic activism has changed over time, but the issues are often the same, right? It's like, how do we get the word out? How do I get involved? So those are some of the kinds of things that I think that we as educators can do, either in K-12 or higher education, is really kind of, make it relevant for our students.
I will literally be thinking about what Common Sense by Thomas Paine on TikTok would look like for the remainder of the day, because but you're right. You can't take the entirety of that brochure and put it on TikTok, but if your family were farmers, or if your family were, merchants in town, like what parts of this? And it really gets students looking, because I think sometimes, especially with history, kids think, well, why do I need to learn that? It's already happened. And it's like, there's actually a lot we could learn. And a lot of these things happen multiple times, are very cyclical. It just looks different because, like you said, now we have social media. Now we have ways to get things out to the world, where you brought up the Declaration. We're coming up on America 250, right? How long did it take King George to get that? I think students don't realize, like, things moved a whole lot slower as opposed to these quick things. Because what if King George was like flipping through his TikTok and saw that one of his colonies is like, yeah, we're good, we're done. Like, that would have been, oh, now I see these kinds of things make me want to go back into the classroom so bad.
And thinking about AI too, and thinking about like Paul Revere's Boston Massacre, right? Is that like the first deep fake, right? Because it's propaganda.
Oh my gosh.
And so you're like, okay, you can kind of think about things like that, and then it gets them kind of, intrigued, right? And I mean, you're not going to capture all of them, but they always, they always say that, if you don't learn history, you're not going to be a good member of society, right? You need to know history in order to really fully participate in society. Because if you don't, then it's like you're not going to really have a point of reference. Why is this important?
Mhm.
And so I think that we have to find, new creative ways to reach out to our students. I used to do I used to have them, do tweets on different topics,
Yep.
and they would just bring them into the, classroom and write them up on the whiteboard. And I mean, some of them were just hilarious when they're talking about the Boston Tea Party or whatever, or voting rights and things like that. So I think if you get a little creative and say, hey, what would this have looked like today? And get them thinking about that, it might kind of spark some interest. And who knows, we may be teaching the next senator, the next president, the next,
Any of them. And
yeah.
that's, I think people think like, oh, tweets, that sounds really fun. And it's like, it is. It also requires a lot of critical thinking. Like to take
Mhm.
something you want to say and you got 140 characters, or I don't know
Yeah.
what it is now, but it really makes them think, and it makes it relevant to them, right? Like we're
Mhm.
talking about TikTok. And I will be honest, when I taught, I did not understand Twitter. And so finally one day I just said to my seniors, can somebody help me with this? Like, I want to understand how to use this. And it became one of the best things I used in my AP government class because that's what they were using at the time. And I dove into that world. It was kind of scary for me. But it ended up being really fun. Now, speaking of socials, one thing that I learned about you is that you have a YouTube channel reading books. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So I have a soft spot in my heart for children's books,
That's because
especially
they're
kind
awesome.
especially kind of quirky children's books. So when during COVID, during the lockdown, I had this whole collection of children's books, and I started reading them and sending them to our child development learning lab because all the kids were now at home during the lockdown. And so I said, here, if you think that this will, help your students, then you're welcome to use them. And then I started to look at, and these are some old school books, right? And my all-time favorite book is The Three Billy Goats Gruff. So that's like I like collect Three Billy Goats Gruff. And so I started to look for other books that were newer and a little maybe more relevant than the old fairy tales and things like that. And I just started reading them, and they're all one take. It's like very low production value, um, but but yeah. So I called it Story Time with Ms. Moni because I'm known as Moni or Moni, and I just started sharing it. And then I have another one, a sub one, that's all on punk rock kids books. and so um and so I have like a few books that are like, the ABCs for punk rock and things like that. So I have a couple of different channels, and those ones are more for my friends because we're all into punk rock. And so I'm like, hey, share this with your kids or your grandkids. So yeah, I've got those kind of little YouTube channel with that kind of stuff. I've got a Facebook page that the same thing. Story Time with Miss Moni. where I was posting stuff for a while, but I'm just so bad about posting on Facebook and stuff. And so, but every once in a while I'll post things. And a lot of them I found some great books. A couple of them are history, kids history books. And some are just really about belonging. And so I think I have a pretty good collection there. So whether you like the Three Billy Goats Gruff, or whether you want Steve Caballero's skating story or something like that, I've got kind of something for everyone.
And that also is a way to serve your community, right? Like there's so many different ways. And don't worry, listeners, I will link all of these for you. I love that you have a punk rock one. It's a very specific niche, but it's needed, right? Like these are the things that it makes reading fun, and it makes it accessible, and it doesn't have to be. And I love that. I mean, you say low production value, I say authentic, right? Because I think what it shows is we don't have to have these like massive production studios, like reading kids' books. Because I always read to my students, whether they were 8th graders or seniors. I think it is such a valuable thing. Maybe I'll start doing it with my college kids. But this is a way to serve your community. And I love that during pandemic, during a lockdown, you still found a way to serve your community. And again, in a way that worked for you and that you were passionate about.
Yeah, it is, it is a good outlet as well, a little creative outlet. And I had taught a class for the honors, our honors program called The Politics of Punk. And so one of the things we did is we had them create a set list and create a poster for a festival or a concert that was related to some kind of political issue that had to be current, not, it wasn't Rock Against Reagan or, some of the some of the stuff going on in the 80s, but it had to be something that was current. And so so that was I also kind of shared it with my students that were in that class so they could see some of the punk rock ABCs and things like that.
Is that class available to audit? Because I would love to just sit and learn in that class at some point.
That class, it was a 1-credit honors class. And so we only taught it once, and it was in spring of 2020. So we went for, 8 weeks, 9 weeks, and then we had to go virtual. But I'd love to teach it again. But I haven't had the chance to.
That sounds like an amazing class. My last question for you is, we're both Arizona girls. I'm not a native, I will say, but I've lived here since I was 6. So I kind of feel like a native. What is your favorite thing about the great state of Arizona?
There's like so much. I think that one of the things that people, their image of Arizona is that it's just a desert, right? It's the saguaro, right? So, and I think, that's just such a limiting vision of what Arizona is about. It is just such a diverse state when it comes to, the mountains, the climate. I mean, we really do have like just, you can drive for a few hours and go from the deserts outside of Yuma to, pine forests, right? And so I love the fact that we have so many fantastic natural wonders in this state. There's so much history in this state. And so I'm also a transplant. I grew up in the California desert. So I'm from about an hour and a half west of Arizona, in a little tiny border town that people don't even think exists. And so but we went to Yuma when I was a kid. The Freedom Train came to Yuma. And so I got to see the Freedom Train when I was about like 7 or something like that. But that's one of the things I love, just driving around Arizona. Yeah, interacting with the people, and the people in Arizona also. I mean, I think what really encapsulates the idea of the Arizonan is I have a former political science professor here at Arizona Western. He runs the Freedom Library in Yuma, and I was doing something for the centennial, and he said, I said, hey, tell me what, I'm collecting things that are your favorite part of Arizona, or what you think represents Arizona. And so some people are like desert, the river, right? Things like that. And he just said freedom. And that really stuck with me, because you really do see that the people in Arizona are free thinkers, right? And you have, we're not necessarily, defined by boxes. Right. And so that idea of independence and and when we think about like, politics, right? We always have a lot of independence in Arizona. And so that's another thing, just I love the fact that we have just a lot of people that are caring, that love the state, and that really, embrace those ideas of freedom and independence, and that's American, right?
I love that you say too, like people think Arizona and they think cactus and desert. And it's like, well, I went to school at NAU where it is a forest, and we have the Grand Canyon, and we have Horseshoe Bend. And I mean, there's so many. I was actually in Tubac a couple of weeks ago, which is a little bit north of Nogales. And it's been to Sonoyta, up in Sholo. Like our state is so diverse, and the people genuinely they're proud to be Arizonans. But that, like, when I say proud to be Arizonans, there's not just one definition of an Arizonan. And I think that's why I love it so much, is we have ranchers and we have farmers. I mean, I live next to a dairy farm and I live in Gilbert, but we also have our big cities and we have our state universities, and we love our history, and we celebrate our history, and we learn from our history. And I think I wish more people understood that about our state, because you said it kind of at the beginning where, a lot of people think history is, East Coast, and that's, where all of this stuff happened. And it's like, but once you start digging into the West, especially our state, it's so interesting. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for, everything. I have so many notes written down from this. I appreciate your time, Monica. And listeners, I will be putting the link to ACHE. So if you want to become a member, the conference information will be on the website as well. I will put her YouTube channel. And Monica, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk to us, and to let listeners know a little bit about you and also about Yuma. I think sometimes people think, well, Yuma is just on the way to San Diego, but Yuma itself has so much history and is such a cool place.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're working on a Yuma history app that's all student projects and little podcasts and again, it's like, I think people don't always realize how much history is in our own backyard.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And once you start digging, really in Arizona, you don't have to dig very far.
You sure don't.
History is everywhere.
History is everywhere, and history is local. Yes. Wasn't that last year's NCHE theme? History is local. Yes. Like, this is where the fun stuff is.
All history is local. Yep.
Yes. Thank you so much, Monica.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Arizona Civics podcast. We're so glad you joined us. Before you go, don't forget to follow us on social media to stay connected and get updates on upcoming episodes, resources, and more. You can find us on all social media platforms at ASU Civics. And make sure to sign up for our newsletter for exclusive content, event announcements, and tools to help bring civics to life in your classroom and community. Visit civics.asu.edu to subscribe. Until next time, let's keep working together to inspire educators, students, and communities to make a difference. See you soon.